Hey folks, welcome back to the Land Fixer podcast. I am your host, Logan Swanson, where we talk all things land, land related activities, fun with land, whatever you might want to talk about with land, but mostly land investing. Um, as usual, if you need to buy or sell land, go to primelandexchange.com, check us out. We can help you list and sell your land, or you can get land at a discounted rate. Off market land that you can use recreationally as an investment, whatever you might want. If you need funding, you're a land investor that needs funding for a future flip, go to landpartnerfunding.com, check us out there, and we'll be able to get you funded. If you are a landowner that is looking to partner with someone to develop your property, subdivide your property, or you want to sell your property, get in touch with me at thelandfixer@gmail.com. All right, let's get into it. So, this is kind of a bit of a different podcast. I don't do a lot of topical, really anything. But I've been looking at the LA fires that have been going on, and it's really proving to be a big example of something that I've been thinking about for a long time. People kind of talk about it here and there, but really not much as it pertains to land flipping or land in our industry. And that is whatever you want to say, whether it's man-made or not man-made, there is some climate change going on. Okay, we are seeing an increase in droughts followed by abnormal rainstorms, flooding, um, and this is all over the country. But specifically, we see it affecting our market here in Texas. We see it in Florida a lot, which is a big land market, and I think California right now, LA, tragic. Obviously no one's excited to see any of this stuff happening. And I'm not, usually, like I said, reporting on anything current. But there's a lot going on. Not just the fires, but people are already projecting into the politics, the laws relating to how insurance is drafted and managed in a state, which has big implications on land sales, how things are regulated, and how we as a society are engineering developments and building standards to keep us safe, right? And out of harm's way as the world changes around us. What kind of struck me is I've been obviously seeing how horrific the LA fires are going on, and obviously we're in this like political atmosphere where it's immediately finger pointing and I don't know, it's nonsense. I'm not going to draw a line here and say that any one side is right. I try to keep my politics relatively private, but for the sake of landowners, land investors, anyone who's in real estate, who's looking to put their money somewhere, this is something you may want to consider. Okay, so if you are in or operating in a region where there's potential for forest fires, there's potential for increasing temperatures, increasing drought. That's, like I said, Florida, Texas. Recently I do this live news show, and we were just talking about how some of the biggest citrus growers are moving out of Florida because of the exact same thing: too much heat, making it so that they cannot grow oranges or citrus fruits in Florida. That's what Florida is known for, right? So there's big changes going on. But hey, let's get into this LA fire situation directly. There's a lot of different places we could start, but I think we should start on the highest level in terms of insurance. This is something that's come up a lot because there's programs. So there's an abundance of risk, okay? Insurance companies are looking at this changing global climate, as well as this dramatic increase in the cost to build, the retail value of these properties. And in Florida, or not in Florida, in California, well, Florida and Texas and other markets that I operate in, they're looking at this and they're saying there is way too much risk here. Like if a fire just like this runs through, their exposure is way out of line, right? And there's governmental agencies that restrict what insurance carriers can do. I believe every state has one. And the goal of this governmental institution, I'm just going to speak generically. I could go through and look all this up and give you the exact institutions per state or whatever, but this is pretty general. Um, these governmental bodies are meant to ensure that every homeowner can get access to insurance. Big deal. They want to ensure that insurance is affordable. That's a pretty big deal. And they want to ensure that there's no solvency issues with insurance carriers. And in our climate, double entendre, current climate, there's some bad stuff going on there. That is not a trifecta that holds together well, because they are telling insurance carriers that they can't charge so much, but they can't go insolvent. Now, I don't think that insurance companies are like good people or anything like that. I in the past worked in construction and saw the way that insurance carrier. I used to be an insurance adjuster. I've seen how insurance carriers treat people when claims are time. It's due, time to get paid, to rebuild properties, and they're usually not very good to work with. I'm not pro insurance in the way it stands for the most part, but I do recognize that this is just kind of an untenable situation. So here, especially in an area like California, their building standards keep going up, which makes construction costs go up. The material costs have gone up, which makes construction costs go up. The taxes are high, which makes the construction costs go up. And then the land values have gone up because everybody, there's, especially in this area where, I've never been, I actually have been to Malibu once, but, scenic views. There's very, very wealthy people there, very nice homes, and also not so valuable quote unquote homes, and also just some older homes that were built long ago that have just been in the family, that all kind of got wiped out. And insurance carriers saw this coming, and they knew that this was too costly for them to hold on to. And I believe State Farm, among others, have been kind of just removing themselves from that market entirely. Something like 1,600, 1,200 policies. I don't know. I'm kind of going off memory with some of the stuff, but I believe State Farm left, and they canceled a ton of policies just like 4 months before this fire went through. Not because there's some big conspiracy, maybe, I don't think, but because they knew the liability of insuring all these homes that are so expensive to rebuild, that are, very likely to get damaged because of chronic fires, and potentially they're looking at the way that the government is regulating things and saying it's not being regulated well. So there's a chance that if a fire does happen, it's not going to be managed well, and they saw big cuts to fire services or whatever. I mean, insurance companies spend a lot of money in underwriting. That's what they do. They reduce risk as much as possible. And if they see a large risk and they can only charge so much to sustain that risk, they have to leave. So the state came up with what I think they called the Fair Insurance Plan. It's some sort of state-run insurance plan, or maybe they manage insurance providers underneath it. Whatever it is, I was listening to a few different folks reporting on this, and apparently this Fair Insurance company has something in the hundreds of millions of resources that they can use to dig into to pay out claims. But their potential risk or liability through these fires is in the billions. So I think there's a pretty good chance that there's going to be a lot of people that are unable to get claims paid after this fire tears through. So what does that mean? Well, a lot of people probably are not going to be rebuilding. And actually, let's back up a little bit. Like, this problem was not unforeseen. Not that anyone planned or that the fires got this out of hand, and somebody knew it was going to happen. But the fact that this risk was outlined and it was so obvious to so many people, and they'd already been trying to create ways to enforce insurance carriers to stay in and to try to mitigate risk and come up with other strategies just to insure people, meant that they were limiting the free market from being able to do what it should have done, which was allow those insurance premiums to get out of control. And that's not fun, and there's negative consequences to it. But what that does is it modifies the values of the property. It actually keeps them in check. So if these insurance rates went as high as they should have, right? So say there was a risk of, 1 in 1,000 years that a fire should have broken out and wiped out a specific home in this area, and they did the math to declare that that is the risk factor. Well, then 1/1,000th of the value of the property would be roughly the I don't know, monthly or annual rate for the insurance. So it's like if it's a $5 million house, which I think is pretty standard out there, well, then it would have been, in the low 10,000, maybe around 10,000, 12,000, 15,000, or something like that to insure it if these rates stayed where they were years ago before this climate change was going on. Now there's climate change that has affected things, caused droughts, caused increased standard temperatures. And then there's institutions that came in and saw that there was going to be a spike in insurance costs, and they tried to keep that insurance cost low. So it resulted in the real estate prices continuing to rise. Now, if the insurance premiums were adjusted to account for an increased rate of likelihood of it being burnt down in a fire, so say it went from 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 1,000 years chance to 1 in 50 years chance, or 1 in 20 years chance that a fire might break through and burn down the house, well, the cost for insurance would go from maybe 10,000 to hundred thousands, 100,000 a year, maybe more. And what that does is now when that home comes to market, people are going to be forced to take that into account when they buy the home. So they look at the monthly mortgage and they say, well, if I buy this house and I have to pay $10,000 a month to insure it, well, this house isn't worth millions of dollars then, because my cost associated with owning and managing this property is very, very high. So what has happened here is this insurance, this governmental insurance scheme with great intentions caused a bubble in the real estate prices. And what happens is when a disaster hits, these bubbles pop. So what I predict, and what I think, I'm not out on a limb here, but I think a lot of people are saying is, after this fire, people aren't going to rebuild. Insurance carriers, I guess they recently did pass a law which allowed insurance companies to do, take into account these weather changes in writing their policies. So now when it comes time to rebuild and people are applying for new insurance policies, they're going to see these costs that were hidden before. Especially if this FAIR plan goes bankrupt, which it appears is possible, if not likely, based on their exposure. And what you're probably going to see, which comes all the way back to land, is people not rebuilding. I think that is very likely in this area. You're going to see some of the most valuable real estate in the country likely going to sit vacant. Flippers or investors or developers are likely going to come in and scoop these properties up at 60, 70, 80% of retail value and sit on them, hoping that there is a more economical time for them to involve themselves and build. Whether that's some change in government, change in restrictions, correction in the insurance market, whatever, they're probably going to buy that land and say, now is not the time. So what does that mean? Well, that means a huge loss. Like, every time one of these bubbles pops, it comes due. So all the money that people were maybe saving in their insurance premiums, it's not going to pay off, because now they're not going to actually, there's a good chance that a lot of them are not going to be properly compensated in rebuilding their homes. And this mechanism is not just built into California or this specific area. You see this really anywhere now that the United States touches ocean. There's Florida policies like this. There's the same policy system in Texas, on the Gulf, where the winds are out of control. But they've smartened up and they've caught up a little bit, at least with some of the building codes and things like that. So if people do rebuild homes, more likely, in order to get affordable insurance, what they're going to have to do is build with maybe concrete masonry units, CMUs, that aren't going to burn down. Maybe they're going to be required to have gravel instead of grass for their landscaping. Maybe they're going to be required to have water systems on their roof. Entire communities may have these things built in order to keep costs of insurance low. And that's kind of what actually should happen in market corrections. Because if people were handed a bill and said, hey, your insurance, say we just go back a year, and State Farm, instead of leaving the market, had these restrictions removed, and instead of pulling all the policies and just ditching, they could say, hey, Your policy is going to be this much. It's going to be a 1,000% increase, which I think it could have been for a lot of folks. And the only way for you to overcome this dramatic increase is by doing these following improvements. And even if your neighbor does or does not do them, also affects your premium, because that's just the reality of it. If there is a much higher likelihood of a fire blowing through and taking down entire neighborhoods, then either the entire neighborhood is going to have some sort of restrictions on how these homes are being built, or the landscaping is being done, or you will have to bear that cost. So I know a lot of land investors who are like still seeking oceanfront property, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but whether you're trying to do deals on the Gulf or you're doing developments, and it doesn't even have to be oceans, all over the country in various ways, you're seeing this sort of change in climate affecting how homes need to be built, how land needs to be developed. Like, there's one of the podcasts I listened to where one of these guys is doing, not one of these guys, but a lot of the big Texas developers, especially out in Houston, where a lot of this is going on, are having to adjust their entire business models to account for the increase in costs associated with developing communities. Gone are the days of relatively predictable rainfall. Here in Texas, drought, and then 3 or 4 days of just torrential downpours is much more often what we're seeing than predictable rainfall. And what happens is you need to have infrastructure that is able to account for much more dynamic waterfall. So everything has to be oversized. Everything costs more to develop than it did in the past. And that's good in many ways, because, all right, we're building for the reality of the world around us. But the downside is everything's more expensive. It used to be you could develop neighborhoods and sell lots to home builders for, 10 grand, 20 grand. Now it's hundreds of thousands of dollars in certain communities in Houston, if they're high end or whatever, because of how expensive it is to engineer and develop communities that are able to sustain the current the state of our weather. I don't know why I'm blanking on that, but at any rate, that's something that just keeps coming to mind, and something that we as investors, I think, really need to pay attention to, especially if we're the ones that are, say, doing paper entitlement projects, right? Where we're estimating our land values based off of what was paid for a year ago or 2 years ago for a community. That may not be the case. Developers who are actually, putting the shovel in the dirt are actually going to have much higher expenses in developing these communities often, especially the closer you get to cities, Dallas, Houston, whatever large markets you're operating near. So what does that mean for us? Well, I think on the county level, that's probably what I'm going to stick with. Is I'm still going to stay outside of DFW and in larger markets, because if you have any experience, these counties take much longer to catch up. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm willing to then build communities or something like that wouldn't stand up to the tolerances of the current climate. But what I am saying is, large acreage, when people build a home, they build a home on the high point. They're not in a subdivision, on these like micro lots with 0 lot limit homes where it's all concrete and there's nowhere for water to go except for in a storm drain. If you are selling or operating with 5 acres, even an acre plus, anything really an acre plus, as long as you're not selling a lot that's in a low spot, people are probably going to be able to build their homes high up where they're not going to suffer from this. Now, what I would say is if you operated in floodplain areas in the past, I would stay far away from those. And I would double down on your due diligence as it relates to water. Whether that's flood water or whether that is water coming out of community wells that you would be digging your own well down to, whatever. Here in Texas, for example, I know there's counties where you just can't get water. They're not allowing new taps. These small privately owned water co-ops don't have more availability. This is hand in glove. This is just another symptom of the changes in the climate. So I could go on here, but I've kind of predicted that we're going to see a swing. I think you're actually kind of already seeing it. You're seeing a rise of inland cities where these exposures are mitigated. What are the cities that are really growing right now? I'm going to be doing an episode here shortly just talking about U-Haul releases all their data, right, for the growing cities or the growing states and what cities are growing fastest. And a lot of them are inland. The Carolinas and Florida are on that list. But the cities are, if you're talking Texas, you're talking Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, those cities are blowing up. Houston, not as much. I don't believe. Cities like Nashville, Knoxville, Tennessee's blowing up. Asheville, well, they got hit this year, talking about maybe some of these potential climate issues. But anyways, all that to say, I'm not an expert in this topic specifically, but I do see how it correlates directly to the land market. So I've said it again and again. I think the people that are going to do really well are the ones that really understand specific markets. And if this is something that you're not weighing in your due diligence, especially if you're doing large projects, if you are not weighing in potential changes in climate to your due diligence, following that trend and seeing what the ramifications could be, people, buyers, builders, they are paying more and more attention each year. So something to really keep in mind anytime you're signing a big check over. So I hope that was a worthwhile listen. Again, I know this is a little outside of my typical realm of exploration, but it's something that's been on my mind. Thoughts and prayers out to all those folks struggling in LA. I know some land investors that are kind of in the way of it. So hope y'all do or stay safe through all this and your family as well. And I hope your recovery is speedy. All right. All that being said, folks, reminder, if you need to buy or sell land, primelandexchange.com, go check it out. If you are a land flipper and you need funding, go to landpartnerfunding.com. We are your source of funding, and we will be underwriting with this in mind. Also, if you have land and you're looking to partner with someone on improving it, developing it, subdividing, getting you top dollar, while keeping you on the sofa, not doing much work, I'm your guy. Reach out to me at thelandfixer@gmail.com, and we will talk soon, folks. Cheers.